Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Welcome to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm Sean Haney, founder of RealAgriculture.com and host of Real Ag Radio on Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM. You can find more episodes of this podcast at mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Today's topic on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is all about non-traditional farm transition. Many times we talk about transitioning the farm to the next generation of our family. We farm our entire lives to pass on the farm to the next generation, and even then, the transition is not easy. Sometimes the next generation has different plans, though. The next generation wants to do something else than farm, which is okay. But what happens to the farm? Are there other options than just selling to the highest bidder? Or are there some different strategies you may want to consider? Today's guest on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast is Dick Wittman. Dick has traveled the world speaking to farm families on business strategy, governance, and planning. Enjoy my discussion with Dick Wittman on non-traditional family farm succession transitions. Hey, Dick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We're going to talk about non-traditional succession planning and structures in agriculture. And, a lot of times there's a transition between the generations, but sometimes, Dick, there isn't that kind of scenario. Let's set the stage here. Why would we need non-traditional succession planning arrangements in agriculture?
Well, it really applies to those situations where the principles that have built up a viable business don't have maybe people in the next generation either available or interested in carrying that on as a profession. And yet the family goals are still that they enjoy being investors together, and so they want to keep the assets or the business intact. So the focus ends up shifting to, well, who will operate the business? Who will actually provide the labor and management to carry it on if there's not a traditional successor in the wings. And this is a huge topic across the world, in Canada and the U.S., with the number of people that want to get into farming and the huge barriers to getting in. There's been lots of formalized programs set up to match people with farms to those who are desires to get involved in farming but don't have the merit or inheritant entree to get into it.
Yeah. There has to be an emotional component to this that people really need to deal with. And what I'm thinking of is, when I talk to a lot of farmers, as you do as well, you're like, why are you doing this? Well, it's my kids, right? It's a legacy. Mm-hmm. And so when the children decide that maybe they don't want to make farming their career, they want to do something else, which is fine. There probably is a real emotional piece of this that has to be dealt with before any business structure is even put in place.
Absolutely. And I can share with you, I can't count the number of times when a really successful farm business person has come up to me and said, I feel like a total failure. I built this beautiful farm business and none of my kids are interested in carrying it on. And I just go right back in their face and say, did you have the career of your dreams running and working on a farm? They go, yes. Were you financially successful? And they go, yes. I said, were your kids raised in a rural environment where they learn the work ethic and values that you hold important? They go, yes. I said, are they pursuing the careers of their dreams and benefiting from the foundation you provided with the farm? They go, yes. And they're waiting for the shoe to drop. And I say, well, then celebrate. And they look at you. And I said, all a farm is it's a career and it's an investment vehicle. And the fact that was your dream career and your dream investment, the best you can do is position it to where if somebody wanted to do that, you would hope that they would. But if that's not their choice, why would you mandate that they like the career you liked? And they kind of look at you and I said, you're not a failure. You're a success. Celebrate. And it's amazing the relief that comes across on the expression in their face. Are they disappointed that maybe the kids don't share their enthusiasm? Absolutely. But it's wrong to create the impression that people that don't have lineal heirs taking over a farm are failures. It's just absolutely wrong.
So what are the considerations? If we know that there's somebody in the family that's not going to stay on the farm, take over it, and continue on with it, what are our options? Because typically what happens is the farmer, he or she just farms it out and then decides to sell. But there is other options, is there not?
Well, there's lots of options. And I think it starts with having quality family business succession meetings with the next generation. Every new client relationship I've had that dealt with succession starts with a family meeting where the only rules are we have broad representation and there's no decisions to be made in the first meeting. And it's an opportunity to share goals and dreams and concerns and fears. It's an opportunity to educate the next generation on what the business is about and what its success track record has been. And it's a place for people to let others know, I'm either interested in the business for a career or not. I'm interested as an owner or not. And as that conversation occurs, if there's honesty and candor, mom and dad may find out that none of the kids want to work on the farm, but they value the farm as an investment and don't want to see it sold. So, well, now you have direction. So if that's the case, then they need to be educated as to how they will become ownership stewards, not necessarily employees. How would they create a board of directors that would hire future farm managers? How would they decide what the value is of working together as a family and owning this joint business asset? And at what point in time, if somebody decided they wanted out, how would you build a framework for people to get out of a portion of that if they didn't want to stay in? These are just critical investment decisions. But it starts with that crucial conversation of having education and input about what the options would be for the future, where there's no right or wrong answer. Once that conversation occurs, and you know what people's goals are and what they're willing to do and what they're not willing to do, you can start looking at options. And you can start defining, well, what would make a good farm manager, or what would be our criteria if somebody came in and operated the farm and wanted to have an option to purchase. So you start making business policy decisions as an owner group. And those are issues that are dealt with every single day in family business.
Is like a natural to be that farm manager, like maybe a current key employee that has the aptitude and has the desire to fill that role, or do you just kind of look all over and have a big search? Boy, that's a big decision you got to make there.
There have been no single routes. There have been situations where a really valuable employee has demonstrated competence and loyalty and tenure. So there needs to be honesty with them about, okay, what will be the career path here? You might graduate from being a key employee to the farm operations manager, and what will be our policy on compensation and bonuses and revenue sharing. And then you have the issue of what if they want to buy into the business? Will you allow them to buy into the land base, or will you let them only have to buy into an operating entity with some certainty of a long-term lease on the real estate assets? There's just no single best route, but there are best practices on the questions that you would ask. And then I think some of the issues that come to play is in the future, who will be the owners and who will provide labor and management? If you don't have active members in the family that want to involve themselves in labor and management, what are the skills and attributes you're looking for? do you have set ideas about retaining the asset and distribution to the family's heirs? Or is there an intent to create an opportunity to purchase for somebody that's outside the family? Huge unfairness has been created by leading somebody on that someday you'll get a chance to buy this, and then all they're doing when they bring an outsider in is creating a placeholder to mark time until maybe the idea of a grandkid comes along and then they want to farm. So that has been handled unprofessionally in a number of times, and it's given some of these non-traditional successions a bad name.
So, and you mentioned this, there's a lot of people looking for entry into agriculture to be a primary producer. Price of land and the capital requirements that are, it's just not, you just can't decide, hey, tomorrow, you know what, I'm going to be a farmer. There, like you said, there's big barriers to entry. So there is a large pool of desire out there of people that, are looking for these kind of situations. I think probably more than people realize.
Oh yeah. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but almost all 50 states and 6 provinces in Canada have active land matching programs of some sort. There are national forums where the people that run those programs come together, and I've interacted with some of those programs from BC to the East Coast. In the U.S., Iowa had one of the most active programs where they tried to match prospective candidates who wanted to farm with people who didn't have lineal successors. And the tragedy was that a high percentage of those matches didn't work. There was unrealistic expectations, not enough thought to looking beyond just skill sets, but looking at personality styles and compatibility with, who your landlord's going to be, which might be the prior farm operators' daughters and sons. They're employed in town and functioning as a board. So establishing a concept of accountability and professionalism where people realize that, you're not King Kong when you're using somebody else's resources. You have to respect the fact that you're accountable to somebody else.
And like somebody that's decides to rent their land out and tries to micromanage that renter and complain about what got planted where and when and how it was done. As family members transition to being maybe board members or they're the asset holders, they're not in operations. That's a role, understanding the role you play. Boy, that is critical here for this to be successful.
And you hit on a key word. What are the roles of members of a family who now are serving on a board? Farm businesses have been slow to acknowledge that they have an owner board component in their governance structure. I'll poll an audience and say, how many of you have a formal board of directors in your operation? And for every 100 people, I might get 1 or 2 hands. But if I rephrase the question and say, how many of you that are business owners and managers periodically review financial statements, you think strategically about the future and whether or not you should grow, you think about who might replace your manager or CEO if that person retired or died, how many of you think about your compensation policy and how we should pay managers and employees in the business? And they all raised their hand. I said, well, you just outlined some of the key duties and responsibilities of a board of directors. And I said, we don't differentiate those decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis on a farm that are board-type decisions from management and operating decisions. So the challenge to educating next-gen owners who are not going to operate the farm is to teach them how to be good board members and where the line is between boardsmanship and operations. So maybe them as a board, they set up the criteria for hiring a manager, they set compensation, they set the policies on how the operation is supposed to operate, and they require a budget to be prepared for their approval, but they don't prepare it. That's the job of management and staff. They don't make day-to-day decisions on when to seed or whether to switch to no-till or whatever. They may impart some directives which says, we've been no-tilling for 30 years and we do not want to undo the good environmentally that we've done. So that is a constraint that you have to live within. So the new guy they can't come on board and start plowing and undoing years of soil structure. But that's a prime example where it's okay to have some operational metrics or boundaries within which a new hired person will operate.
We'll get back to my conversation with Dick Wittman on the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, but first a word from our sponsor. This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. For many, farming is a family affair, with each generation facing its own unique challenges. A solid succession plan goes beyond handing over day-to-day operations. Develop a plan that supports your farm's legacy and its future. Visit rbc.com/succession and speak with an agriculture account manager near you. What are the pitfalls to avoid here then? If this is for some people that are listening to this and they say, I may be in this spot because I'm really not certain if my daughter or son is going to come back to the farm. They've gone to school. They're kind of waffling. I have that. If they decide to come back, I've got a plan for them and for us in the business. But if they don't, I got to work on plan B. So what pitfalls do I avoid?
Well, there's several. The first is not having candor up front on what people's expectations are. Parents may assume that all their kids want to be landowners when maybe some of them say, I don't have any desire to own the farm. I don't want to take the risk. So let the others own it and give me life insurance or something else. But having that candor up front so that people aren't put in positions where they're uncomfortable. Another thing is having whatever plans you make committed to paper. So many times we talk, excuse me, but we do not commit those to paper in the form of a plan that can be reviewed to measure whether or not it's performing according to plan. Another pitfall is underestimating the importance of setting up professional communication systems like quality board meetings and who should be at the meeting and who shouldn't. And I think it's okay in a farm business to say, this is our culture that we want to live up to, which may include a commitment on all parties to communicate professionally. And so one of the tools that I advocate is that every member of the business working together should go through a personality profile test to see how they're wired, how do they understand how others are wired, and how do we, if we're making communication a strong goal, how do we use that knowledge to improve communication skills? I have several situations in non-traditional succession where a really talented employee was looked at as a really good prospect to buy in and become part of a business. Well, the minute they got inside and started exercising the role of an owner, they were incompatible. And in hindsight, the family looked at it and said, if we had done a personality profile test, we would have learned things about our relationships or we would have never gone down this road. So some people think that that's a lot of foo-foo, touchy-feely stuff. They're just flat missing the point. That when you have people working together in ownership and labor positions that differ, the importance of professional communication can't be stressed enough. So you want to use every tool you can to understand how people, what their leadership style is, what their communications and personality styles are, and do they respect professionalism? Sometimes they're like, just leave me alone, let me do my job. Why should I have to dance around you and watch every word I say?
I may have skipped ahead here. I think I should have asked this question earlier in terms of, okay, what are the considerations on whether or not the family wants to be a landowner? Because that was one of the things that was just mentioned in the Pitfalls. So what are the considerations there before we even go down this road?
Well, I think a critical thing is having the family really honestly talk about what is the emotional tie to the land from generation to generation. Would the family entertain a serious option to sell the land if it was at the right price? So when you're trying to attract a non-traditional successor, most people coming into the business are hoping to have some kind of a share of the rock. They want to have something they can call their own in terms of an ownership investment. And if they just want to work as an employee, most of them can find that in lots of places. So it's really important to have honest discussions and be right up front and say, well, we probably will never sell this home place farm, but we would consider offering an ownership opportunity on some of these adjacent farms that we own, that we bought over time, but they don't have the emotional attachment to us that this home farm does. Well, now you've given a candidate, a reasonable expectation that says, I'm never going to buy the home farm because the kids are going to keep that as part of their legacy, but I will be given an opportunity, as my financial position dictates, to have an option to purchase some kind of a farm asset. And again, that's just so critical to have those questions raised and discussed up front instead of assuming, and then you go into this relationship and you just assume that I'm a good guy and they like what I'm doing, they'll let me buy in, and they maybe have never had an attempt to allow that happen.
Dick, this has been a fantastic, informative discussion on an issue that I really think should be getting more attention here, because this is something that I think has been out there and people have just dealt with it without some of the options being presented to them. So I'm glad we had this talk today.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it up. And I would challenge all of your listeners to look into the land matching programs that do exist. They're just some very passionate people that are really interested in the farm, find a way to get into the industry. And when you look at the percentage of farm owners and managers who are in their 60s and 70s, it's like 50% of them do not have a succession plan or a lineal successor. So the angst and worry about what's going to happen with my farm it's huge. So we should not be just wringing our hands. We should be looking at those resources and pursuing every avenue we can to match up those that want to get in the industry with those who have the opportunity.
Dick, thanks a lot for joining us here today.
Great. Thank you.
When we work our entire life to build a legacy and the plan stalls out due to the next generation showing interest in other things than farming, we need to have a new plan for the transition of our farm. I hope that you enjoyed today's discussion of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. If you have any feedback or comments, please email me at shaney@realagriculture.com or call the Real Ag listener line at 855-776-6147. You can find more episodes of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast at mindyourfarmbusiness.com. Thanks to RBC Royal Bank, and until next time, keep on minding your farm business.